Hello, everyone, and welcome to Roll for Combat Live! Is that how Steven usually does it, with like some weird?
There's no consistency. He does whatever he wants.
He does whatever Steven does. Yeah, I think that's more or less right. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about, is bigger always better in tabletop RPGs? So let me read you this important description. Our massive rule books and endless character options, the pinnacle of tabletop RPG design, or our smaller, faster, rules-light games actually more fun? We break down the strengths and weaknesses of complex systems like Dungeons Dragons and Pathfinder versus lean, streamlined TTRPGs like Shadowdark and Mörk Borg. We'll explore how depth, creativity, speed, and accessibility stack up in both styles and answer the ultimate question: which one should you play? Whether you're a veteran game master or brand new to the hobby, this comparison will help you find the system that fits your style of adventure. So, Derek, think we can do that?
I think we can. And believe it or not, it's probably going to be a case where our takes are nuanced, and the answer is going to be play what works best for you and your group.
What?
But, you know, what? So to not bury the lead, is bigger always better? No. All right, well, thank you.
We did it. Thanks for watching. Is bigger always worse, though, Derek?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
It's a spectrum of things, and there is a case. I mean, we talk about this a lot on my channel, of course, but there's a price that you pay. You know, when you play a game like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or when you play a game like even D&D, which I know a lot of people think D&D is a very simple game, but it's not. Like, it is
a game that likes to hide its complexity from new players, but also that's not a bad thing. No, I would say it's actually a strong boon of the system, and something it was designed to do well by good game designers, which is to hide its complexity from new players to make it easier for them to pick up.
Sure.
It does hurt the game master, or the dungeon master in this case, quite a bit to do so, but I would argue that it was a goal they set out to achieve, and that it was a smart goal as well.
Well, right. It's like that old saying, right, which is like, you can have it fast, good or cheap, but you can't have all three. And so there's always a trade-off to be had. And for me, a fair amount of the design elegance, I use this term elegance, is to think about it in terms of ratios. Like, we use the term juice for squeeze, right? How much additional, complexity, or how much additional depth of a game system are you gaining versus how many more rules systems or subsystems, or how many more pages of rules text or rules exception text do you have to put in? Draw Steel has sort of been top of mind for us lately, and I made a comment that they went ahead and used what the 13th Age minion system. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but the problem with that is it makes it too easy to kill minions with AoEs, the way that they developed it. So they created this really cool, easy-to-use system. But then they had to create a separate rule that specifically applies to when you use AoEs versus minions. Now, is that the end of the world? No. And they obviously felt like it was worth having that minion rule, even though they had to include an additional subsystem to specifically handle area of effect, fireball-type effects, to sort of mitigate how effective they would be against minions, given the rules that they had created. But that choice wasn't free. You had to pay some amount of complexity, some amount of, we talk about PCs or GMs and players at tables in a computer sense. You have, it's like you have your hard drive, you've got your RAM, you've got your CPU, and everything that you're doing is using up some of those systems. There's a bottleneck there at some points. Going to the hard drive is like having to bust out a rule book and having to look it up.
And it takes longer.
And it takes longer, right? And if you have got a lot of rules, it could take a lot of time, especially. And then even then, if the rules are really well organized and they're well ordered, it can be really quick to find them. But sometimes you're flipping through pages. You're like, I know it's here somewhere. Right. And then CPU is just how intensive is this game? How much am I trying to keep in my mind and juggle at the same time? We're obviously Pathfinder 2, Mark, you're very familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it when we're, even when we were talking about Pathfinder 2 and D&D and other systems, as almost a graph of complexity versus depth in the game. So when you have a game and you want to add more depth to it, you want to add more options, you want to add more tactical nuance, you want to make it feel like there's something to it and that you're really able to make real choices that have a real effect on the game, we consider that to be something that is generally a good thing. Now, some games actually don't seek depth, and that's okay too. But for many games, it's a good thing to add some depth to it. But unfortunately, you cannot add depth for free. Like you were talking about before, Derek, there's a cost to that depth, and that cost is complexity cost. And the complexity cost is that's the bad side of having more things in your RPG. That's like you talked about before, where you have to put like a kludgy second or third tier rule to get the first rule that you wanted in there. That's where you have to redefine something in a stacking way or put a pointer to another section of the book. That basically the goal of Pathfinder 2nd edition was to get a very high amount of depth. And then once we knew that we wanted that much depth, then we would try to get it at a lower complexity cost. Whereas
first you design the game, then you make it more efficient, right? You make it more elegant.
And you're doing it throughout the way, but we didn't want to sacrifice the depth. We didn't want a game that was less deep, just to get better complexity. Whereas, some other games in the same sort of D&D like space have a goal to minimize the complexity first and then see how much depth you can actually fit in with the near minimum complexity. And those are very different goals, even though both of them are trying to make complexity be low and depth be high. Well, you're going to get to a very different result.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing you have to realize is different people, and this has nothing to necessarily do with your years of experience in the hobby. Some people could be playing for 20, 30 years. For some people, the personal cost of complexity is very high. And for other people, it's very low. They can, that you can think of it as tolerant, like how much do they tolerate a more complex game? And the answer is some people tolerate it very well. And they are happy to pay that cost if it means they can get a deeper, more, what I would call interesting. And I use the term interesting to mean like there's a lot of decisions. It's a very mental type of experience. They're willing to pay that price. For other people, it's not. And, of course, obviously for me, one of the GOATs is Mark Rosewater. And Mark Rosewater, who is the lead designer of Magic the Gathering, they have to strike that balance. And in a sense, they also have to kind of create cards and stuff like that for Magic that kind of appeal to a wide variety of people. But at the end of the day, Magic as a game is trying to create a rewarding and fun experience with trying to minimize the amount of complexity in the cards. Now, you could argue whether they've succeeded or not because the cards have gotten a lot more complicated over the years. But I also think that's part of the, gamers are more, I don't know, they're more veteran now. It's like we're standing on the shoulders of 40 years of game design at this point. I think there's sort of like you can assume a higher level of base skill for people. But still, it's a really interesting question, which is where a game like Shadowdark or old school games come into play, because those games aren't particularly deep mechanically. That doesn't mean that you can't have rich and rewarding gameplay, but they aren't. There's not a lot of knobs and levers, at least as presented in the text, which is why they're usually 20, 30 pages long for the whole thing.
And honestly, Shadowdark, it's curious that Shadowdark was used as an example here for the other side, because Shadowdark is longer than some of those other ones and does have more depth than some that you could go into options that really are about like mostly improvisation or very, very simple gameplay loops.
Past a certain point, I start to, is this even a game anymore? Like if we get too simple, like for example, I was putting it away when we were starting up here, Mark. Like, Fiasco calls itself a role-playing game. I don't really call it a role-playing game. It's like it's more of a a party game experience. I don't know. It's
but
like,
it is a game, though. It may
no,
be a party game, but it is a game.
It's definitely a game.
I'm willing to say that some things that people think are games are not games and are instead activities.
Activities, yes.
To which I will, and I have before on the show, add Candyland, War, or any other, quote, game where you make no decisions and the entire game plays itself.
Yes.
Chutes and Ladders or Snakes and Ladders. Another good example where, yes, it's true that there's a randomized element and so you don't know what it is, but literally you being there had no value compared to if just like a computer told you, okay, I've scanned this deck of cards and what the order was, and I've now told you that Derek won. There was no actual other value to playing War beyond that, except for maybe that you got excited as you saw the intermediate steps of it.
Right. Well, yeah, so, that's one element of it, too. The other thing, too, that I think is important, and I talk about this, or at least for me, it's an issue. There's a difference between, for me, and I know that this is probably an esoteric term, and I might even be using I might be defining them wrong, but I talk about the difference between a complex game and a complicated game. And I know that sounds like it's kind of the same thing, but for me, maybe there's a better term we can come up with, but you could have I fundamentally think that, for the most part, a game like D&D and even Pathfinder 2, obviously it depends on your taste, but the overall complexity there, I think, isn't horribly high, compared to a game like, Rollmaster or, or one of these games where you're rolling on like a subchart for a subchart for a subchart.
Some of those games with bespoke systems and subcharts were very complicated.
Right.
But it actually depends on the person, though. Like, you were talking about tolerance for complexity. I'm going to actually try to open that up into even more nuance, because it's a very good take. But there are certain types of ways of doing things in games that will actually cause what is complexity for one person to become simpler for someone else. And then there are some ways of doing things that are just always complicated for everyone. So to give an example, some of those old systems with tables where it would just be like, oh my gosh, every single thing you have to remember, it's this own bespoke table. It's nothing like any of the other tables. Unless you have like an incredibly good memory, you always have to look it up every time because it's just its own bespoke thing. It's very different than in Pathfinder 2, where there are a lot of rules, but they're very modular and they follow very specific design principles on how they work, to the point that I've heard from a lot of people that they've sometimes forgotten a rule, improvised something based on what they know of the general rules, then gone back to look it up, and it was almost exactly the same thing that they did already. And that's very important.
You can guess. Yeah, you can guess because there's such consistency of the application of the same rule.
And that's very important because people who have that kind of logical mindset, especially if they've done any kind of computer science, programming, or things like that, can sometimes actually have an easier time. Even though the game has more complexity in it, which is usually a load and is usually a problem, they can actually have an easier time with a game that is very methodically consistent than one even that is just literally less complex, but just kind of the Wild West, where it's like, how does this work? Whatever your GM said today. It might not have been what they said yesterday. Sometimes those methodical and logical players who may have done computer science actually can get lost in the Wild West and be like, I feel a little bit like anxious about doing things because I don't know if it's going to be rolled even remotely close to last time. So when I say that I take this action and like it requires like a sort of a social aspect, it requires trust in your GM. This can also be true for players. Like I've had players at my table who were like, for instance, on the spectrum, and they were much happier when things were codified than when it was just like, oh, there's these invisible rules that everybody apparently can kind of guess what the GM is going to do, but I can't do it. And so it can be the case that like for those players, the so-called simpler game is actually more complicated because they're trying to tap into something that's not obvious or common sense to them.
Correct. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I oftentimes I think when some people are talking about their problems with 5th edition, I think D&D. I think and a lot of people recommend Pathfinder too. I think it's exactly in some cases that element. There's either an uncomfortableness with having to manage these, as you call them, invisible rules and the uncertainty of effect and outcome, or they want to be able to sort of have a good understanding of how the game operates before they start making character decisions, whether that be building the character, but also in the middle of an encounter or another type of moment. And then I think you have other players who don't care about that stuff, and that's why they don't have any problem with 5th edition, because they're like, that doesn't bother me, that the rules are maybe a little bit inconsistent.
Some people want to know before they declare, I swing on the chandelier over there, like, let's say you were doing it in D&D, and be like, okay, is the GM going to rule that that's my action? I swing on the chandelier over there, now I'm next to the boss, I can't do anything else. The boss then just, gives me or something like that, right? Is the GM going to roll, well, I think I'll make that your free interact, where you go in on the chandelier, and then I'll use it swinging as part of your movements for the turn, and then you have your action at the end and your bonus action for D&D. I don't think that a GM is wildly out of control making either of those two rulings.
No.
But they are so different that I personally would feel like I would need to clarify it with the GM first before I even declared the action. Instead of going to my turn and Mark, what do you do if you were the GM, Derek? And I wouldn't just say, I swing on the chandelier over there. I would say, before I decide, I need to know, if I swing on the chandelier over there, do you think I could do that as my interact and my movement and then take an action? Or would that cost my action? I need to get that out of the way ahead of time. And if I was the type of person who didn't think of those things and just declared it, I might feel pretty unhappy if it happens and I had to roll a check to dexterity, acrobatics, and I made it over there. I made the check, and the GM's like, great, okay, and now that's your action, so you're done.
Yep. Well, and it kind of like what you were saying before too. It's like, if you even have a baseline of how everything sort of defaults to a given resolution mechanic, at least then you can feel somewhat comfortable in saying, all right, I don't exactly know what check the GM is going to call for, but it's going to be a good check that it's going to be a D20 plus a bonus versus a DC. And at least I can sort of rely on that and make some sort of, presumptions of how that works. When we were talking earlier about wildly different subsystems, a great example of this is look at D&D before 3rd edition. So attack rolls used a D20 plus a bonus versus a target number, basically, which, we all now feel very comfortable with. But thieves used a percentile system that nothing else really used. And then clerics turning used a completely different system that involved rolling 2d6 and adding your level and consulting this chart to determine what hit dice of undead that you wanted to turn. When you
turning undead was just the classic, it's
the classic.
What is happening here?
So that is an example, in my opinion, of a more complex system, because you have basically bespoke systems for each of the classes. Now, some people, even I've argued, that there's a charm to that. It makes you feel distinct and unique and different, and I think that's kind of a fun, a little thing. But it does eat up those CPU cycles and those RAM cycles and those hard drive cycles that we talked about. And if you're a newer player, God help you. But then when you get to 3rd edition, and Pathfinder 1, they streamlined all that, and it just became D20 plus modifier versus DC, right? That it became very, very simple, very, very bespoke. But so in that way,
even Shadowdark does that, right?
Correct. That is what that is.
It has some new school and some old school sensibilities combined.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it's doing so well.
Of course.
Because as much as maybe the OSR people want to bemoan that stuff, the fact of the matter is that is a very wildly popular thing. Now, it may not have an exceptions-based rule for every single little circumstance that some of these games do, but it still relies fundamentally on this D20 plus modifier versus DC, advantage, disadvantage, roll your die. And you can be sure that regardless of what kind of ruling, quote unquote, your GM makes, it's going to follow those guidelines of complexity, and you can take some amount of comfort in that. But the other thing that a game like D&D does, but also I'd say a game like Pathfinder 2 does, certainly a game like 4th edition did, is they may have streamlined the approach from a complexity standpoint, but I do think that they made the game maybe not as complex, but more complicated. When I say that, I mean like hundreds of different feats, hundreds, if not thousands of different spells. Now, D&D always had that. A lot of different spells. They all had a distinct thing. But then you added feats. 4th edition added powers and feats and magic items. And suddenly, the game might be very simple. But then, hey, here's 1,000 pages of little doodads and knobs that sort of change that core assumption. And maybe you have to look through all of them if you want to pick your favorite one. Or, not to say that you need to memorize every single one, but I think there's some people out there who feel like they do. And that's an example, again, of a trade-off where you're giving people these customization options, but you're again, putting that sort of onus on them. And so if you look at a game like Shadowdark doesn't have feats. It has a very small spell list. When you level up in Shadowdark, your fighter gets like a +1 to hit, and it's a random roll. You don't really get to decide that. Or you add 2 bonus to your stat. So a lot of people, I think, look at a game like Shadowdark, and they think, in my opinion, incorrectly, but this is debatable, that, okay, so the game is super simple, and all we're going to be doing the entire game is just rolling d20 and adding a bonus versus high. But I think the idea there is that, and rather than having the game mechanically create these additional options and complexity, the idea is that you're going to be making shit up as you're playing, and the GM's going to be making all these rulings, and you're going to be sort of, freewheeling, which is great. But I think some people find that very intimidating. I think GMs find that intimidating. I think players can find that intimidating. There's a lot of people who worry about balance. Is this fair? Am I going to make consistent rulings across one session, let alone multiple sessions?
Yeah. Are you making consistent rulings each session? Are you making consistent rulings for each player?
Right.
Did you maybe accidentally either biased rulings that were better for one player, or
I'm guilty of that.
Even in the other direction where you're like, I know I'm really close to this person, and then I realized that maybe I was giving them worse rulings because I didn't want to give them better rulings, and so I psyched myself out, right?
Right.
Those are all things that can be scary for some people, and that's what goes back to your thesis, Derek, at the beginning of the entire thing. Episode where you said the answer is no, but it's more nuanced than that. Because if you're someone who's like, yeah, I don't care, that doesn't sound scary at all. Those rulings are just so comfortable to do, and it's fine if it's inconsistent or that one person was getting more biased. Whatever. It's a game. We're here to have fun. You're probably going to find those lighter games that are very ruling heavy to be kind of up your alley more. Whereas if you're someone who's like, no, that's actually very intimidating, having a very centralized mechanic and having something that can cover me, and I can go off of that if I want, but that I know that there's something to fall back on that's solid and consistent, then you're probably going to want one of these bigger games. No, but like you said, Derek, bigger doesn't mean that it's consistent. Some of these bigger games are very bespoke and inconsistent. So
right. Exactly.
Those are probably not literally better for any style of gameplay, but they do, like you said, have the charm. They do have some charm in that.
And the other thing too is, a rule is only as good as your application of it or your ability to remember it. I remember, what was it when PF2 first started? And I think we made a video about it, and a lot of people were like, oh shit, I've been running that rule wrong the entire time. I can't remember what it was. But there was this, kind of clamor, a little bit. This is back in 2020, early 2020 or something.
Was it cover?
But I don't remember what it was, but I just remember there was a lot of people who were just like, "Oh, we've been running that rule wrong," and I could see how that could have a big impact on the game. And when I say a lot of people, I mean the vocal minority of Reddit, or something like that, or the Paizo forums. But
you mean 30 people, but
yeah, right.
The 30 who responded. So as far as you know, that could be a microcosm of thousands, and it could be that there were 50 and 30 of those 50 responded. And you can never know on the internet.
The other thing is, there's just so many little nuances to these decisions. For example, I believe that to a certain extent, I'm guilty of this in certain games. In certain games, I respect the system more than I respect the system in other games. And the reason I say that is because I believe that in certain games and certain systems, there is inherent or there's an inherent, maybe it's explicit, but it's often implicit understanding amongst myself and the players, I'm assuming I'm the GM here, that we are going to be playing by these broadly applicable game rules. Everyone knows here that one of my biggest things is about player agency. And that element that is across all the elements of the game, including what choices you made during character creation or level up, or what magical items you chose to pursue, and all these other factors. And that means I'm not in the habit of, sort of changing up those assumptions in the middle of a game that might have made your choice less valuable or less important. And because I think that that's me taking away some degree of your agency, even sort of posthumously. But my issue is that when I play those games, I kind of want to get the rule right. And I know that rule is sitting there waiting for me to look it up in the book. And that's a price too. When I'm playing a more rules-like game, or I'm playing a game that I quote-unquote don't care about, I will happily make some sort of off-the-wall ruling and be very aware that it's probably neither fair, nor balanced, nor correct, and not really care about it because, quote-unquote, it's not that kind of game. And when I'm playing a more, what I want to call precise game, like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or 4th Edition D&D, or maybe the new Draw Steel, where I really want to make sure, like, there's an element here of sport, of kind of competition. Like, you're trying to build your character to defeat these obstacles, and the rules are set up in such a way to sort of challenge you and give you tools to accomplish those challenges. And I want overcoming those obstacles to be meaningful and be driven by your choices. There's sort of an incentive on me to be like, yeah, I kind of want to get this right. I kind of want to make that choice for you. And so it's almost kind of a weird turnoff for me sometimes to play those kind of games, because I know that my personality is one where I'm like, I'm going to want to look this up and make sure we get it right. And I'm not smart enough or whatever to memorize all the rules. And so, so I don't. But then when I'm playing a rules-like game, jokingly, Kelsey came over when we were playing Shadowdark, and somebody not like seriously, but was kind of like, oh yeah, Derek's running your game and getting all the rules wrong and fucking it up. And I just kind of gave her like a big thumbs up, and she was like, excellent, that's awesome, because I didn't care, it wasn't important to me. And that kind of game system, it sounds mean to say, but I don't respect it. which is not I'm trying to make it sound like it's,
that's
kind of a
interesting
thing.
When you were talking about game systems you respect or not, and when you make different changes to it or rulings, I was thinking of something very different. So
okay,
I'll maybe it comes from the same place but has like a different nuance. So I'll tell you, for me, actually, those rules light games, I think because I do respect them, I tend to make off the wall rulings, but I try to make sure that they're in keeping with the design philosophy of the game, or something that it feels like the game itself, either through forwards where they've clued me into that, or maybe Kelsey just literally said it to me at some point in time, if we're talking about Shadowdark, where I feel like the game and its designer are like really for those kind of rulings. So it's out of respect that I would do the same as you. For me, whether or not I'm talking about like how much do I respect like the rules as being more sacrosanct, it comes into play mostly for those heavier games, and it's basically how much that I'm going to be willing to tweak without having played the game a lot of times. So
right.
For example,
that's also true.
There's a game system that Linda and I actually like a lot, and we've played for a very high amount of time. The 20th anniversary edition of Changeling and Mage and some of those other World of Darkness is one that we happened to get into during the pandemic. I think they made some of them free at 1 week during the pandemic to get people to get them, and someone posted that in Paizo, and we got it and we played it, and it is a very cool setting. It is a really neat game with a lot of good ideas, but there are just some parts of it that are just clearly, I don't want to say wrong, because I mean they published it, so like it could be right in their eyes, but even I think that it's wrong because some of the other 20th anniversary editions have almost the same rule in it, and it's not the same. And the one that looks right is in more. For example, like there's a weapon table in Changeling, and just a few of the weapons were just like blatantly strictly better than the other weapons of the same group for no reason. Like they had easier difficulty to hit while also having more damage and no other drawbacks. So once Linda and I found that there were enough of those things, I would say that we deeply respected like the setting and the lore and the general way the game was running, but we didn't trust like every little detail to be right. And so without playtest, we made adjustments to some of these things. Like we changed some of the weapons to be better, that were not as good as the ones that were strictly better than the other ones. In I think it was Mage, we made some adjustments to like the rituals because it looked like they were getting out of control, to put some limitations on that before we had tested it, because it was just at that point so obvious that it was going to be out of control without it. Yeah. And so what you were talking to me, it sort of it activated that part of my brain where I was thinking about those systems where I'm like, I mostly trust you. Yeah, there might be a typo in those systems where it's like, this is a very good game overall, but it has enough like flaws in the mechanics that I won't trust it until I verify it.
Yeah, and I think that's important. You know, you maybe some of these heavier systems, can create a certain degree of orthodoxy, which can be very problematic. I remember when Pathfinder 2 came out, and there were people went, the parry trait has the interact, or the parry action has the interact trait, and thus would provoke a attack of opportunity when you activated it. And it seemed like that was very counter-purposed for a defensive ability to trigger you getting attacked. And there were a lot of people who said, no, this is clearly right. It's in the book. And they were, kind of cognitively dissonantly, like trying to like defend it as like it makes sense from a simulationist perspective. It makes sense from, whatever perspective. And clearly this is fine for a balanced perspective. And obviously that was not your guys' intention. And it did get changed. But there was like this kind of like, the rules are better than me, and like I am but a servant of the rules, and my mastery of this game will sort of be tied into mastering the rules. And that appeals to a certain percentage of people, for sure.
It definitely does. There are people who feel that the rules are a sacred text. The designers are not. We're not divinely inspired and should not be listened to, but whatever is literally written down in there by those same people is sacred. And in some ways, it helps them like connect to the game, and I think that's okay. For me, as you saw, my spectrum of things always included that I'm going to house rule and change it. The question was just, do I trust it enough that I am going to play it a few times first before I make my house rule so that I can calibrate my house rule, or decide I wasn't going to do the house rule, or do I not trust it to the point that I will house rule without having even played it once?
Right.
Yeah. But I still will change it. No matter what.
Well, you, I think, Mark, amongst many people, you yourself have the credentials to be able to feel somewhat more comfortable doing that than others. But like,
perhaps, but it's a chicken and egg, because I was the kind of person who was going to do that always, right? Before, I didn't need to be like, now that I've worked at Paizo at 9 years,
but that's
I now have the credentials that allow me to make these adjustments, right? I was just the kind of guy who always did that, and that's part of what helped me get the job.
Yeah, so like that's true. I mean, like I said, that's what I said. Well, that's probably why you ended up there. But like when we played Forbidden Lands last year, and before even playing it, I said I think these are probably problematic, and I had kind of communicated with my play group, who are also very obviously engaged in sort of the quasi game analysis space, and they're kind of a general feeling of why don't we just play it at rules as written, and. After like the first session, like a bunch of them were like, "Oh yeah, you were right, Derek. Like this is actually kind of problematic." But you know what? I don't think it's going to be a game breaker, and we really kind of feel lazy, and we don't really feel like trying to come up with a solution for it. Like it was one of those situations where I recognized that the rule or the system was problematic, right? But the people who can identify a problem are usually not the same segment of people who can come up with a solution for it.
That's right. In fact, there's sort of three things, right? There's the people who can identify that there is a problem, right? Those are like, if I like to use medicine and game design as sort of metaphors. So that's someone who's like, ow, it really hurts in my abdomen. right? Then there's the people who can successfully determine what is the actual cause of that problem. And then there's the people who can find a solution for that problem. So for the medic's end, that's like, oh, you have this pain in your abdomen, and it's actually because of such and such a condition, right?
Right.
Where they'd be like, is it a heart attack? The first person, I feel chest pain. Is it a heart attack? And it might be. So, like, if you don't know, you could be worried that it might be. But then your doctor's like, well, you know, there's 3 or 4 other things that are more likely that it might be. And then there's the other person, you know, and any of these 3 things may be the same person. Like, maybe if like, you're an experienced game designer and you sense the problem, you also will figure out what was the cause and propose the solution. But they might be different people. And playtesters tend to be extraordinarily good at the first one, which is determining that there is a problem. Correct. As a whole, as a mass, playtesters are not great at either of the other 2, but you can sometimes find people who did. Weirdly, I think that playtesters, sometimes the thing that they're the worst at is actually the second one, which is figuring out the source of the problem. Because when you have enough playtesters and you know what the source of the problem is for sure, often like one of them has come up with a good solution that you might be able to use. So it's a little more complicated, but you're exactly right, Derek.
Yeah. Right, and I think Jaina makes a great point in chat, right? Which is make sure your solution isn't more problematic than the problem, right? You don't want to go like, you don't want to go Mao, you know, killing all the sparrows, you know, type thing, you know, where you're like, oh, this is a problem, we have a solution, and then suddenly you're like, oh, wow, this makes every other element of our game horrible and broken and problem.
Right.
You
Let's
know?
bring in cane toads; they'll take care of things.
Right, exactly. So, it's a tricky, you know, it's a very tricky slope, but. You know, but again, a game like Shadowdark or a lesser game sort of tries to sidestep that problem by saying, rather than being obsessed over these minutia, you know, we'll sort of let you custom fit it to your standings, right? Is it Ben Milton? There's a term, I don't know if Ben Milton came up with this term. I think it's kind of a bullshit term, but I mean, I think it's fine. They call it the fruitful void.
I don't know. I do know Kelsey talks about it a lot.
Okay, well, it's a term that gets used in the OSR.
And I know that Ben talked about it too. And the only reason I worry about
it is that it starts to get a little bit, in some circles, it starts to get a little bit Stormwind fallacy-like. And for those of you who don't know, Stormwind fallacy was like an old thing from the 3rd edition eras that basically said that if you built a strong character, then you can't role play, or that, you know, the corollary of it is
vice versa.
Yeah, in order to role play, you have to have like a weak character that has obvious flaws, and you know, you can't make a great character and be a role player.
Yeah,
like,
the
those
basic
two things are
thing is that wanting to be an optimizer and a role player is mutually exclusive.
Correct. And so with this fruitful void, you know, concept, there seems to be this idea that like, you know, this idea that like if you have rules, then you can't possibly, and you're following those rules, and you have a breadth of rules, and you can't possibly be making player-driven decisions, or you know, have emergent gameplay, or any of those factors. And I find that it's kind of a false equivalency. And again, I have not heard Kelsey or Ben say that, but I have heard like people in that, you know, that region sort of talk about that as if like, you know, it's kind of like it's like art. You know, you go to some modern art gallery and like I show you a blank canvas, you know, and I'm like, look, this is the best piece of art you've ever seen. And you're like, you didn't do anything. And I go, I've allowed your imagination to fill the blank canvas. And your imagination is more powerful than any piece of art I could ever create. I've given you an opportunity to, you know, fill it with your heart's desire. And you're like, nope. You sold me a blank fucking piece of paper. Right. And so I think there's like there's sort of a weird trade-off now where it's like kind of a race to the bottom. And some of these minimalist games are just trying to be like, how little can we sell people and still call it a game? And I'm kind of being devil's advocate here because I'm not really advocating for super hyper complex games either. But it's more of just like,
I'll try to.
It's a game. It's a game. It's okay to have rules. It's okay to have rules.
I also think it's okay to have rules. I guess obviously as one of the creators of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but I was recently talking to my little brother who wanted to know more about, some of the newer systems. He's very into rules-heavy games, but he was like, so what's the deal? You guys are doing something for Shadowdark, right? So I knew he's like someone who is very not in favor of the fruitful void, and I wanted to try to explain it to him and some of these other concepts from OSR games, or like games like Shadowdark that merge OSR and modern sensibilities in a way he could understand. So I used an example from my own experience. I have a maybe unique-ish experience in that, like, I played Shadowdark, had a fruitful void thing accidentally happen, and then later got like a confirmation from Kelsey about it. So here's what happened.
Okay.
I got a confirmation that the thing we did was like something that was so far beyond what even she thought was in the fruitful void that no one would ever do it. But it actually made the game better. Probably. So I was playing a Shadowdark adventure that was being run by Zipper on Disney. You can actually see it on YouTube if you go there. And at one point, my character got hit by something that caused me to become stupefied for a very, very long time. We were all like, what does that do? And I was like, well, in Pathfinder, it means that you are like worse at mental-based tasks. And someone else is like, well, the dictionary definition of it might be that you can't move. And we're like, we don't really know. I was like, well, maybe I'll just play my character as making very extremely poor decisions and be unable to use my spells because I was a spellcaster or other like cognitive abilities. Mm-hmm. And everyone was like, okay, that makes sense. So I was like, I'll run up to the Archmage with my sword, with my cleric, and stab. And I actually got a 20 and killed him.
Sick.
It was everyone thought it was awesome. And so later, just like randomly independently, we were talking to Kelsey, and she was like, some of these things, there's a fruitful void, you don't know exactly what it is. But, for stupefied, everyone would know that means you can't act. Like, that's very clear, at least. But what the specific details of it, that's something that you might have to figure out for yourself. But it's obvious that you can't act. I was like, well, for our group, it wasn't that obvious. We actually did something else. And she was like, that's great. Wasn't it more fun than if you couldn't have acted? And I agreed. It was. And that's what I told my brother, too. And he was like, that's a really good example that you made. Sure. Even though I'm not, he was still not convinced that he likes fruitful voids. He's more like you on that one, Derek.
Right.
He gave me almost the exact same thing that you said. He said, I was still not convinced, but you made an excellent case for it, because you're right. It would have been way less fun if you were just out of the fight for a really long time at that point after you got stupefied. So for your group, the ruling that you made in lieu, when there was no specifics from the game, made it more fun for everyone.
So what is right now, I mean, it changes, right? It changes from month to month, certainly from year to year. Where I'm at and where I've been for some time is what I actually really like is a dynamic and robust set of rules which don't explicitly map to every situation, but the game gives a ton of guidelines about how those situations would map to those moves. And so the best example I can give of this is like Powered by the Apocalypse or a Dungeon World game, where at the end of the day, when the players you're having a conversation with the players, and if you feel like a move may have triggered because of that conversation, you can look at the limited list. I mean, there's not really that many moves in the game, and say, does one of these apply? And if it does, let's apply it. And one of the moves that does a lot of heavy lifting in a Dungeon World or Powered by the Apocalypse game is called Act Under Fire or Defy Danger, is what it's usually called now because of its Dungeon World name. And it's basically sort of a generic roll 2d6. You either do okay, it doesn't work out okay, or you succeed, but with a complication or a cost. That simple framework is enough for me to engage the mechanics without feeling like I'm making everything up, but it gives me a lot of latitude. And it's not explicitly, oh, this exact situation maps to Defy Danger. This specific situation maps to Defy Danger. Instead, it just says, hey, if what the players are doing sounds chancy, risky, relevant, dangerous, probably time to make a Defy Danger roll and see what happens and let the dice decide and sort of disclaim decision-making. I really like that style of play because I don't feel like I'm being handcuffed by the rules, but I also feel like the rules are there to help me and support me. In a way, it's like a really healthy relationship. where, you know, it's not the old ball and chain and it doesn't let me do what I want, but it's also like, no, but this person is allowing me freedom, but they're there to help me and support me and let me achieve my goals. And so that's a really healthy relationship that I think I try to build with a rule set, is where I feel like it is a boon or a advantage to me running a game, rather than being a hurdle or an albatross around
I see what you're saying, though, with robust examples, because some of those style of games give you more robust examples than others for how to apply them. And the ones that don't, sometimes do that intentionally. It's not like, oh, the game designers forgot to give robust examples. It'll be like Blades in the Dark, which I really enjoy, but it actually doesn't give that many examples. It gives a few. And then it specifically says, we're not going to give that many examples because we don't want to chain you into our sort of idiom and play style. You'll figure it out. And to me, I think my ideal is more examples than they gave, even though I also really like it. And actually, literally for me as a GM, I don't need the more examples. But to me, as a game designer, my ideal would be to give more examples, because you've locked out at that stage a decent number of GMs who really could have used the more examples. And yes, maybe their gameplay style would have been more similar to you, but now they're too intimidated to run the game.
Well, Blades in the Dark even goes a step further, where they'll give an example of play, and then after the example of play, it'll go, when so and such did so and such, you know, in the example of play, I called for another roll. Would you have done the same?
Yeah,
Maybe
I actually really
different.
I actually really liked that that aspect to it.
Right, but it's basically telling people there's no right answer here.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are like, no, just tell me what the answer is, right? Like I don't want to have to make it up.
Some people want more of an answer, and I feel like Daggerheart gave more examples and gave more guidelines on what to do.
Oh yes.
And whereas Blades definitely did not, and it's been longer since I've read Apocalypse World, but I feel like it didn't give as much either.
Daggerheart did a really great example, I think, of giving a lot of examples and talking about it. But that's another aspect too, which is games that have a very strong identity of what this game is and what this game is not. And really sort of internalizing those principles and those agendas as a means to sort of judge your decision making, I think is also very important. And certainly, you know, games like Daggerheart have a lengthy section about what is your job as a GM here, you know, and I think some games like, you know, D&D are kind of trying to be everything to everyone, and the advice is a little bit more nebulous. The guidelines aren't as precise, because while I will say that, you know, a game like Daggerheart or a game like PBTA, a game like Dungeon World is, you know, kind of loosey-goosey in some ways with its, you know, how you should implement the rules. What isn't, if there's a hard rule at anything, it's, as a GM, these are your guidelines. This is what you should be doing. You know, you should be promoting the characters. You should be focusing on collaboration, not competition. You should be filling their lives with adventure, danger, and excitement, right? Like, those, if anything, those are your rules. And so when you're making a decision about how to, you know, handle a certain situation, it should be going back to those core principles. It should be going back to those first principles and ultimately sort of, you know, driving from that perspective. At the end of the day, as long as whatever ruling you come up with supports that core ethos of the game, then I think you're doing okay. You know?
Yeah, and personally for me, as a game designer, it's not that hard to do that, to make a ruling that goes back to ethos and goes back to core principles if I get a lot of principles and not a lot of examples. But I have definitely met a lot of people who that's not something they can do that easily. They need examples rather than principles, because the principles are too abstract and they're looking for something more concrete. And to be fair, like, there's nothing that says you have to make a game that is meant to be for more people. Like, you can make a perfectly good game that is like, I want this to be the game that is freeing and perfect for anyone who can't go back to the ethos and proceed from there. And I don't mind that it's not accessible to the people who can't do that. They'll find another game. There are tons of games out there. That is a perfectly reasonable decision to make as a game designer, and you can make some beautiful, gorgeous, and artistic games that way. Just for me, accessibility is something that I'm always thinking about. Like, how could we make it so more people could run this game, could play this game, could experience this amazing game?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Draw Steel is a great example of that. They don't. Number one, I kind of said Draw Steel is one of the first RPGs I've read in a long time that is sort of like a mainstream that I would call a 200 level RPG, which is that it doesn't have a section about like what is a role playing game, and here you need paper and you need pencils, and these are what dice are, and this is what a D4 is, and this is what a D8 is, and if you roll two D10s, you know, this is how you determine what a D100 is by using your dice. The 0 means 10. Like, it doesn't do any of that. I think it just assumes that you know what you're talking about. And then the first page or two is basically talking about what this game isn't. It talks about, like, this game isn't a dungeon crawler, and if you want to play Shadowdark, you should go do that. This game is not, you know, a narrative forward, you know, sort of open, emergent, collaborative game. That's what Daggerheart's for. They literally call out, quote unquote, their competitors by saying, that's not what this game's about. They start off by saying, this is a game about fighting monsters and having it be really cool and having it be really fun fights and having it be really engaging, tactical, cinematic, heroic. And that's what our game is going to focus on. And I thought that was a very bold choice. But to your point, it basically, to a certain extent, I'm not saying it's flat out telling you can't play this game, but it's kind of telling you, like, you if you're not interested in that concept, you shouldn't, or you shouldn't use this game, and this game shouldn't be used for all of those things. Or if you're going to use it, you're either going to be disappointed with the mechanics, or feel like, why does this game have all these mechanics that I'm never using? Or you're going to feel the need to house rule, hack, change a million things, and be like, what am I even doing here?
I mean, but it's a fair disclaimer, right? I'm someone who likes to have lots of tactical options, but it seems like, given that Draw Steel, you're supposed to have pretty mixed adversary groups, and the adversaries have a lot of different fiddly bits that they can use, it seems like it's worth warning people, because if you don't have, what did you call that, CPU bandwidth? If you don't have an incredible amount of CPU bandwidth, it's not going to be easy to run these mixed groups of adversaries as the GM. For a player, I think that what I've seen in Draw Steel is manageable for people who don't have just a especially low mechanical bandwidth for abilities. But for a GM, you need a very high bandwidth. And like, maybe eventually there'd be a VTT that's automated for that, but it's not going to be there for a while because they're doing that themselves.
Well, you can tell the reaction of how people react to certain types of games just right off the bat. And that in Draw Steel, you have numerous resources that you accumulate. Some of them are combat-only resources. So, you know, you accumulate this token pool, which is called your heroic resource, and you use it to spend on your powers, to use your bigger and better powers. And so there's this tactical decision about, hey, I've got 5 resource. Should I use that 5 resource to use my power that costs 5? Or should I save it for next round when I can use my 7 power resource or my 8 power resource? There's actions I can take in the combat that will get me my resources faster. But is it worth the positioning? Is it worth, you know, changing up my turn in order to get more resource so I can have a bigger turn later? So there are a lot of interesting decisions. But there's also a thing called hero tokens, which are kind of like hero points. But it's a communal pool. And already I saw a lot of people going, I don't like that. Because now, like,
to be fair, I do not like communal pools.
Right. There's a social aspect to this tactical game, and I don't want that. You know.
You make a good point that it's especially So this is a me thing. It's not me saying the game designers who put communal.
I think, Mark, you speak for a lot of people. I think you speak for a lot of people
are bad.
When you say this.
But I am incredibly conservative with my resources.
Yeah.
And when there's a communal resource, that means I don't get to use it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It means not only do I not get to use it, but I start getting anxious and upset with myself for being anxious when other people are using it. And I don't tell them they can't or not to, because that's rude. But it makes me feel increasingly anxious and not happy the more that they use it without me saying, please don't use it. I'm feeling anxious and not happy. And then by the end of the session, I'm basically a nervous wreck. and I've never gotten to use it.
Right.
Even if we're winning, that's just what
absolutely.
happens when there's a communal resource in the game that is like an important one.
Right.
And don't get me started on what happens with me with Dread, where that's what determines whether you're alive or dead is that communal resource
Is
in
the
the middle. It's the game that is an amazing horror game, and actually does make me feel horror. To be fair,
it's horrifying to you, Mark.
It's horrifying to me, to be fair, but it's also deeply unpleasant.
Right.
Whereas if I had my own little Jenga tower, I would be feeling horror and also have way more fun.
Did you ever hear my house rules for Dread?
No, or maybe when we talked about this before. What
maybe we did.
rules?
Yeah. Well, we played Ravenloft, and we used Dread as the mechanic. So we were playing, Dread, had to go, into Castle Ravenloft and fight Dread. But I wanted to add like some sort of conditions that I could assign as sort of a consequence for actions. And so one of the so they would affect the way that you interacted with the tower. So like one of the conditions was
I think you did talk about new conditions
you got.
added.
Yeah, you got like a 15-second egg timer, to make your pull. Or another one was like you had to use your offhand to make the pull from the Jenga tower.
Yeah, I'm remembering this now when you're talking about adding conditions. I was thinking of house rules as being more like modding the base rules.
Now to be clear, Smith showed up with a 3.5 character with like a undead Slayer prestige class, and he was like, "Oh, I thought we were playing Expedition to Castle Ravenloft," and so he was like, "Can I just play a 3rd edition character while the rest of you play Dread?" Anyways, but going back to that element, there were a number of people who were sort of like, I like Draw Steel. I don't like this communal aspect of the.
And Math Guy Dave says Draw Steel would be designed in a way where I would use the communal resource. Maybe, but I wouldn't use it as much as the other people, and I would feel bad about it the entire time. So
to be clear, Math Guy Dave, we're not talking about surges and we're not talking about heroic resources because both of those clear at the end of a combat anyways. So Mark actually would probably be more incentivized to use them all.
I would use them because they clear at the end of a combat.
Right.
It's when it's a daily resource that's ticking down, and that will actually I might get stuck in an encounter later on without having that resource because it was wasted in my mind on a fight we could have easily won without it.
Yeah.
I actually don't know which one Derek is talking about because I'm more familiar with
hero
some
tokens.
Okay, yeah, I'm more familiar
which is a communal. It's a communal party resource that persists from encounter to encounter.
With some of the beta versions, and even then, I've been reading some of the new version, but I haven't had enough time to wrap my head around everything that's in there.
Now, so, again, while we're talking about all these things, I sort of a tangent shift because I do want to bring up something here, which is I don't know what people actually think of me and my hobbies and what I like. Obviously, everyone knows, behind me I've got a massive thing of 4th edition. But right next to it is BX D&D and 1st edition D&D, and I obviously love those games as well. But I am going to say something. This is a condemnation, not a condemnation, but it's a condemnation in general about the OSR. And that is, and I'm just speaking for me here, I find these games to be a lot of fun. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of a game philosophy concept here. And again, a lot of this is inspired by my, conversation, or by my sort of indoctrination by Mark Rosewater.
It just makes it sound like Mark Rosewater radicalized you or something.
Yeah, well, they kind of, which is these games. I find these games to be very fun, but I also find them to not be very interesting. And so my experience with most of these games, Shadowdark, any of them, is that, and this is strictly from a systemic position, a good GM in a good campaign who is doing a lot of great things can make any game interesting. But by itself, this game, after, I don't know, 5 or 6 sessions, you're kind of like, it feels kind of samey. And I think that one of the problems I have with OSR games is I think that they are very good for me for one-shots, which I don't even really like, but more like many-shots, multi-shots, where, you're playing for between 1 to 12 sessions. And they're a lot of fun. And I know that my investment in the game is going to be minimal. I mean, there are campaigns nowadays where it's like I might play once a month. So a 10-session campaign is going to take the majority of a year. But I'm like, it's 10 sessions. I don't want to learn, an entire 450-page rule book.
Yeah, right. Do you want to read and learn all of Draw Steel for 10 sessions and never playing it again?
Nope, absolutely not. And I feel like that's unfair to Draw Steel because I feel like a lot of you're leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't really dig in. If you
it has so much tactical depth that you would never get to explore if you were just like, well, I'm done. 10 sessions. I'm done.
There was a little thing. I don't want to say it was throwaway because it was just kind of randomly buried in the text. There's sort of a generic language of banes and edges, basically advantage and disadvantage in that game. And but there's this little throwaway text that if an enemy has a bane against you, it doesn't get to make opportunity attacks against you. So if it has Bane against everyone, no, it doesn't make any opportunity attacks. And it's this really great little thing where you're like, wow, if I could apply this effect and I could give it Bane, then we could reposition around that creature and not suffer any opportunity attacks. And you're just like, the tactical opportunity afforded by that is very deep and rich. If you remember that rule and you remember that it exists and you remember that you're applying it and all this other stuff. So I don't want to necessarily invest all that time into getting good at a game that I'm only going to play for a limited amount of time. So that's where a fun game can be great. There's not a lot to learn here. It's just for a good, fun time. But for me, this is for me, after a while, there's a lot of fun board games. They're not that, people would call them lightweight or medium weight board games. But after you've played them a couple of times, you're like, I get what we're doing here. I get the strategy here. And now the situation sort of has resolved itself. We know what we're doing, and the game loses some interest. Whereas a more complex investing game feels like it's worth my time and my investment.
And I think that's gonna vary from person to person. Though,
absolutely.
Right? There are people out there who play, and often because they have like you said, they may have a GM who's an amazing storyteller and who sucks people in, but who play very old school or stripped down games that don't have much depth to them, but they play them for decades.
Correct.
Because their characters are what have depth, and the stories and the NPCs and the world are what have depth, even though the game rules do not.
Right, and I also think actually there's two sides to that. I think one, it's like you said, the campaign, the world, the story, the character arcs, those all can suck you in, even if the game mechanics are fairly light or fairly shallow. The other thing, which I know is a huge way that I play old school games, is your character may not advance mechanically in the book as you level up or anything like that, but you're still going to advance mechanically with random bullshit that I come up with. Like you might be playing a game that doesn't have feats and doesn't have powers, but in my game it's like, oh, but you trained with Limu Bai, in the forested grove, and as a result you get this cool new bespoke ability and write it on your character sheet, and now you can, you are a master of the 1,000 strikes and you have this ability that you can, I just making it up.
Even if you didn't make up something like that is very similar to just giving a feat for free, I think, and some old school gamers might not go for that.
Correct.
What is more old school than something like, I drank from a random magical fountain in the dungeon,
right? And
we rolled on a D100 table, and the thing that it did permanently gave me either a bad or good thing that is now on my character. Like that kind of stuff is all over the place, and it is 100%. A form of progression via like survival bias, where the ones who got the bad ones die, and the ones who got the good ones live, and by the end you wind up with, you may have stacked a few good ones in almost a Rainmaker scam, where it's like, I'm getting stronger because I'm the one who happened to roll randomly good several times in a row.
One of my favorite, we had a campaign, and to the surprise of no one, my campaign featured magical fountains and the like. And somebody had rolled really well. And the idea was that there was this dungeon and there was a fountain on every level. And they were like on level 6 or 7 of the dungeon. And they had drank from all 7 fountains. And they had rolled really well. They had avoided all the bad ones. They'd only gotten the good ones. And they get to like level 8. And they drink. He was a feral gargoon. Do you remember that, Mark?
Feral gargoon.
Yeah, it was from like the Savage Species book. Or maybe it was from the Races of Stone book. But it was some ridiculous ECL book. But anyways, he gets to like 8th level. He drinks on the fountain, and he gets a result which says you permanently lose all fountain benefits or bane. You lose all the bad stuff and all the good stuff. Basically, you don't get to drink from the fountain again.
I think that was Races of Stone.
Okay, but he lost all of his fountain benefits, and so his character basically lost all of his abilities. This was like an old school game, And his character wasn't dead or anything. He just lost all of his abilities, and he just immediately grabbed his character sheet and held it up. And we were like, no, 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 no. And he went, ugh, and he just ripped the character sheet in half. Because as far as he was concerned, his character was was done, because that was the advancement that he had gained in that game, was this sort of diegetic progression through the fountains and through magical items. I always say that kind of modern games, by that I mean Pathfinder, Drawsteel, your characters are kind of like Superman, right? Your power or your ability is intrinsic to who you are. In an old school game like Shadowdark, you're a bit more like Batman. You get rich and you buy cool tools, and you have weird gadgets that you can pull out of your belt that do strange and weird bespoke things that nichely solve these unique problem sets. And so it's kind of a question of, do you want to be Superman or do you want to be Batman? That's kind of what it really comes down to.
To be fair, there are some games like 3.5 or Pathfinder First Edition where you can be both. You're both unbeatably strong, and you also have a utility belt full of answers that will immediately defeat anything.
Correct. And that is both the charm and the curse of Pathfinder 1, and you're 100% right. But, because what I saw, especially in Pathfinder 2, Mark, is like the movement away from sort of defining your character by your magic items. Right, and being more defined by your class feats, the fact that there's
or specifically your class being very, very important to your character.
Yes, correct.
And your ancestry becoming more important than it was before, even if not as important as your class.
To the point where we say most of the time that in Pathfinder 2, as long as you have, whether you're using, automatic level progression or whatever, as long as you have a striking rune and a potency rune on your weapon and a potency rune and a resistance rune on your armor, the rest of the items are kind of fluff. Like they might help you. They could absolutely help you, but you don't really need them. Maybe a skill item or two, but like you don't need
some of them are very strong. But like what you're saying, they'll make you stronger, but you also won't lose the game for not having them. That was very intentional. Like some of them are so strong, they'll make the game much easier. But you don't.
Whereas if you go back to 3rd edition, it's like, okay, well, do you have your ring of resistance? Do you have your ring of protection? Right. Do you have your cloak of resistance?
Did you remember the Iron Stone that gives a different stacking bonus to AC? Yeah. The Rose Prism.
Dusty Rose Prism.
Dusty Rose Prism.
Which gives you an insight bonus to AC, which didn't even exist until that item got created, and that'll stack.
Remember this weird hat that gives you a luck bonus to AC and negates all critical hits?
Right, exactly.
I hope you did. It only cost less than upgrading your +1 ring of protection to a +2 for some reason.
Right.
That's how it was back then. You needed so many different items. We actually did want it to be that you needed fewer items, even if the items can help you a lot. And you might, if for someone who's like, yeah, I've ignored every item except the ones Derek just said, they might wind up being the person who has bought all their items and very carefully chose it. It might be 50%, even 100% better than the person who literally has no item except for those 4. But they find the best things. And this one blinds the enemy when I get a critical hit, and this one does this other thing. But in 3.5 or Pathfinder, the person who didn't buy any items except for upgrading their sword with basic stuff and their armor could be 5 to 10 times worse. It'd be I can be 10 of myself without my gear easily.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even be a challenge.
Yeah, and 5th edition took a kind of more extreme version of that by limiting you to essentially 3 magic items. Obviously, there's a couple that don't use up one of your slots, like your weapon or whatever. Or maybe your weapon does. I don't remember. But
I think that weapons usually don't require attunement, but there may be some specific ones that do, because items say if they require attunement or not, and it's part of the balancing point in 5e is whether it does cost your attunement.
Right. But regardless, they clearly were we want to avoid what is colloquially termed the magic item Christmas tree, right? Where you're just a person who is just bedeckled with, rings and bracers. You look like a World of Warcraft character, with a paper doll. Where you're like, what do you got on your shoulders? What do you got on your clavicle? What do you have on your, what do you have on your sternum? What do you have on your hips? Where you just end up having a magical item for every single joint and body part on the body,
including new ones that are created by someone later on. When they're like, well, I've determined that there's now also a pinky ring item.
Right.
And then it becomes necessary in 3.5 or Pathfinder 1. It's well, suddenly the entire game balance ratcheted up. Let's say that the pinky ring item gave a new type of armor class, and or there's one in there, but there's 5 different options. It's like, well, now the expected armor class of characters has all just gone up by 1 because this pinky ring item exists and is now expected.
There's also, I think, something to be said, and I don't necessarily know that I agree with this mentality because I don't particularly like it, but I think there's an idea that, like, the simpler a game is, that the deadlier it is allowed to be because, quote, it's easier to make a new character.
I've heard that philosophy from people before, but I don't think it's necessarily true.
I don't think it is either, but I do think there's something to be said about, you know, look, let's call it what it is. Making a character in, let's say, Draw Steel, or Pathfinder 2, can be a process. And, you know, it's not something that you're going to be able to bust out in 5 minutes for the most part. I mean, maybe someone who's really good. And especially at higher level. And so there's sort of an idea there that, like, if you're just dying all the time, you know, you're having a funnel system, you're kind of like, this is a little bit counter-purpose, you know? And so, like, you don't feel as invested, maybe, in an OSR character, theoretically. You know, your character was literally created as a bunch of level 0 characters, and you just pick the one that didn't die. And, you know, there's not really as many choices to make. It's a lot of random decision points. And, you know, you're aware that the character could be remade in a couple of minutes. And so there's maybe this sense of less attachment to those characters, which could be a good thing, but it also might be kind of a bad thing. And I know that I have a tendency to play sort of older school games, less complex games. I always play my characters like I stole it. But, you know, there's a difference between playing it like you stole it. There's a difference between playing it like you rented the car, you know, and you don't have to worry about the long-term mileage, but you're going to have to return it at the end of the rental period, versus literally playing it like you stole it and, you know, you're planning on crashing this car into a wall before you get caught. And I definitely try to, so for me, it almost affects the philosophy of how I play. And I don't necessarily know which one I like. I don't know which one I like better. I mean, I'm sure, Mark, for you, I'm speaking for you, Mark. I feel like you always play your characters cautiously and conservatively, and you're trying your best to maximize your chance for winning and make the right call.
So that's not quite right.
Okay.
But I play the character based on, if we're talking about like a one-shot character where I'm given like a personality on that, I play whatever it says on that personality. And if it doesn't specifically say that they're a reckless fool who is running off to die or some equivalent to that, where they always look before they leap, then I assume that most people have probably a higher innate sense of self-preservation than you, Derek, probably do if you're playing them as if you stole it. I assume that it's not a normal human activity to just be like YOLO and jump into the spiked pit in case after getting impaled I find a treasure on the wall nearby or something like that. Like, I try to act with at least a normal level of self-preservation. And if it says that they're super reckless, then I'll do it.
Yeah. You actually kind of hit the nail on the head about one of the main reasons. This is kind of a side. It's kind of a tangent. Why I don't think one-shots, especially convention one-shots, are a great way to learn how to play a game system. Because I feel like most people know that there is no tomorrow for your character. In addition to sort of being denied the opportunity to experience the game's sort of long-term progression systems, I think it tends to sort of cloud or highly color your experience of the game, because people tend to play kind of like assholes, not necessarily in a bad way, but you know what I mean. Like, but
no,
you know,
some people do. I've seen it.
Your point being like, you're like, well, there's a spiked pit, and you're like, oh, I'm going to climb down there. Well, it looks really dangerous and deadly. Yeah, but there might be treasure down there. I don't give a shit. You know, like, let's go get some treasure. You know, and you basically end up throwing yourself down the pit just because why not? And then people come away from the game and they go, yeah, it was okay. You know, we died a lot. And you're like, well, yeah, because you're playing like an asshole. So I think that's one of those things that that's just an aside of why I think that one shots of systems can be problematic.
See, I like one-shots, but you have to be playing with the right people, right? If you play one-shots only with pickup groups, and they're not taking it seriously, that could be one thing. Whereas I've definitely enjoyed tailored one-shots with pre-gens that I have run before with people I knew were really going to get into those characters, and I've had, like, hilarious situations come up where, there was one where I had a one-shot, and one of the gimmicks of the one-shot is that all 3 of the PCs were, like, secretly hiding something from everyone, but they all sort of knew about this one little house in the woods that, because 2 of them were childhood friends, they had both found it at one point, and the other one found it independently. And so they were all trying to use that house in the woods to do a secret meeting. At almost exactly the same time, they ran into each other without realizing it, because I was using some technology to do side chats with people, even though we were at the table. And then they came out of it, the thing, because they were all incognito, thinking that they had run into, like, some of the adversaries, but they just all ran into each other just through coincidence. You can get lots of weird, fun things that happen. And I had set up, like, some degree of this by having them all know about this shack, but it was totally the idea of the investigator that he would, like, give himself a tip box and a bunch of other things that happened that led to this whole collision. But that was, I was playing with people I knew who they were.
Right.
And I gave them characters that I thought that would be interesting to see that person play. And that's very different than be like, oh, Stephen Glicker's here, and he's just going to jump into a swarm of zombies and throw that wizard into them as he swings away.
Right. Yeah. I was playing a con game once, and we did something, and like a demon or something got released, and the demon was like, after 1,000 years, I am free. Serve me or perish in the great evil that will come. And I go, my character drops to a knee and says, I serve you, my dark lord. And the GM goes, bluff check? And I go, nah, I'm not lying. And he goes, okay.
No, I've had that happen before.
He goes, kill your worthless companions. And I said, all right, fair bet. And I just turned and I started attacking.
At a delve at PaizoCon, there was like a aspect of Lamashtu that showed up. And
okay.
Kyra, the cleric of Seren Ray, is the one who did that exact same thing. So I was like, all right.
By the way, mother of monsters, if you're not familiar.
Yeah, Lamashtu is like a chaotic, evil, jackal-headed mother of monsters deity who is incredibly evil, and the cleric was of like the neutral good, goddess of the sun and healing. And so there's like, I will now obey you. And so I was like, all right. So I whipped out like a picture of vampire Kyra from this was in first edition. So there was a vampire picture of her from
Occult Adventures?
No, Horror Adventures.
Oh, Horror Adventures, damn.
Because I ordered the art for that, and I made all of the art like as bad as possible for the PC. So I was like, oh, the bard loves expressing himself through art, so I'll make him be the shadow touched one that can no longer experience joy or emotions. And Kyra is the cleric of the sun, so she becomes the vampire who can't go out into the sun. And so I pulled that out, and they're like, yeah, okay. You now are holding a rapier, because this one is holding a rapier, and you're going to be attacking your fellow party members. Like, it can be fun. I think that's not a bad thing about one-shots, that your example of, like, deciding that you were working for demons. In fact, it's a story now that you can tell. Yeah. Maybe it wasn't fun for the other players at the moment. I don't know.
I mean, it wasn't fun for the gnome cleric who I grappled, and he was very proud of his armor class, and he was like a gnome, and he had like full plate and a tower shield, so his AC was like 27 or something like that. And I went, I grapple him, and he's like, do you have, and the other player's like, do you have improved grapple? I was like, no. I'm like, make your attack of opportunity, and he's like, I'm not holding a weapon. I go, okay, well then I grapple you easily, and I hit your touch AC. And turns out my grapple check is way better than yours, because you have a massive penalty. And then I just grappled him until unconsciousness.
But you always can get wild things in those one shots. I think that could be a benefit to one shots. I know you don't like them, but and also to weird or simplified systems. Like, I have all sorts of stories about those.
I am much more likely to play a one-shot of a game that I already know. I don't like one-shots as a means of teaching a system.
Oh, I get that. I understand that. I see where you're coming from that. I thought you were just saying you didn't like one-shots overall.
Yeah, I mean, they're not my favorite, but they're fun or whatever. Like I would happily play a Dragonbane one-shot or something at a con with people who knew Dragonbane, because it could be fun and it would be like exciting. But if like somebody's like sitting down to try to learn how to play Draw Steel or Pathfinder 2, and you're like, okay, here's this 450-page game. I'm going to somehow teach you the rules of the game, and you're going to play it, and it's all going to happen in like 2.5 hours. I'm like, I just feel like you're just leaving so much on the table. And then for a lot of people, that will be the only experience that they have with that game / will make all their decisions off of. And I'm like, I don't know. That just seems risky.
No, I see what you're saying, but you could just get memorable moments. Like Ryan Macklin, who's the author of Mythender, was also an editor at Paizo, and he ran a one-shot for some of the people at PaizoCon Delve, where at one point, one of the mechanics he put in was that he ate part of one person's character sheet.
Ryan Macklin, is also
the
creator of backstory cards, which is like one of my favorite, one of my favorite session 0 tools.
But yeah, like he bit it off and ate part of the character sheet. And he's like, this part of your character is not there anymore. And Valoros was like, this is like where my 2-weapon fighting feats were. He's like, yeah, you don't have that because I ate it. Like, that's the kind of thing that you can't really do.
No, you can't really.
First of all, you can't really do it during a ongoing campaign at all. Second of all, you probably can't do it without Ryan Macklin. In fact, later, one of the other editors wanted to do something similar, and she took a red line editing pen and just crossed off lines from people's sheets because she wasn't going to eat their character sheet.
Or there was a famous one shot that we did on our actual play, and it was, it was it was Dungeon World. Well, actually, it was World of Dungeons, which is like the super micro light hack of Dungeon World by John Harper. And that game has a progression system, obviously a one-shot. So I sort of changed it to like how you would gain experience points so that there was an opportunity for you to buy like 2 or 3 advancements throughout the course of the night. But you could also earn an experience point by doing a shot. And so we had alcohol on the table, and like right off the bat, Smith just like did like 5 or 6 shots in a row to like immediately level up, like as soon as the game started. And he was like, okay, level up. And obviously that's not something you probably want to do for a more long-term campaign, which is like, every time somebody has a drink that they gain experience and gain a level. So yes, it's more about, that's a good point. It's more about having fun than it is having what I would call I don't know,
a high fidelity experience with that system, maybe.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's
because certainly having your character sheet eaten by Ryan Macklin is not a normal way to play.
No. But
it was very fun for the people who, including the person who lost the abilities. It's very memorable, but they don't probably know as much about how you would play a normal game where your character sheet was not eaten.
Right. So you brought it up already, but this game is, number one, literally designed to be a one-shot. There is no tomorrow for your character. But also, 2, the premise of the game is, all right, we're going to be doing stuff. You're in a horror game. When you want to do something, I might ask you to pull a brick from the Jenga tower. If it falls, you die. If you succeed at pulling the brick, you did the thing. That's it. That's the rules. Let's play. There's nothing more deep to this game than that. And so this game is great as a one-shot because it's only a one-shot, but also the game rules are literally pull a brick from a Jenga tower. So I find this to be a fantastic experience for quote-unquote a one-shot. And I would probably never play this game except at like a convention or something like that. Fiasco's being the same way. For a more deep game system, I like mechanics, Mark. I like rules. Not like I'm a rules I refuse to make a ruling. We have to look up all the rules. I'm just saying, like,
if you refuse to make a ruling, you wouldn't.
I think rules design is beautiful. Like I appreciate. Magic the Gathering calls this a Melvin, right? Someone who appreciates I guess you would say the artistic quality of a well-designed set of rules.
Elegance of rules.
The elegance of a rule, yeah, and the rule system and the way that they interact. Like when I see a game system and I go, oh man, that's a little kludgy. It's a little inelegant, and it's not as smooth, and it would work better if it did this. And I'm like, that's where I get this kind of grading sensation, whereas I really enjoy some of these. So when someone can make a complex rule engine, and it all works together very smoothly and seamlessly, then I'm like, oh, there's an inherent beauty to this. And so while I really do like many shorter, less complicated, Shadowdark type games, I also feel like at a fundamental level, it's easier to get right because there's less moving parts. It's a very simple design. So yeah, of course it's elegant. It's not really a complex machine. And so there's sort of it runs smoothly, but of course it does. There's only like 5 moving parts versus like a very complicated game system with a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, I would say it's it's easier to get that part of it right, but it can be difficult to get some of the sort of the thematic feel of the game the way that you want to. It does take some talent and game design to put out a game like that, because you have to be careful about what you do say and what you don't say. You can't just say it all.
Right. Correct.
So does that mean, Derek, that what you're saying is who wins between D&D and Shadowdark, and your answer is Powered by the Apocalypse?
I mean, yeah, I guess I kind of split the middle. No, honestly, if I have a problem with D&D, it's that it is more complicated. It is more complex than Shadowdark. But it's not complex enough to make me really want to be interested in playing it. And honestly,
so you'd rather play PF2 or Draw Steel if you're going to something that's more complex?
Right. If I'm gonna, I'll tell you this: there's not a lot of room for me in the middle. If D&D is a 5 and Shadowdark is a 3, and PF2 is a 7, right? I'd rather be at a 7 or a 3. I don't really want to be in the middle. So, that there's just not a lot of room for me there in the middle when it comes to rules complexity. I like a healthy set of rules or a slightly less set of rules. I don't like the in between half measures, if you will, because whenever I play D&D, I find myself going, all right, this is clearly more complicated than an OSR game. Man, I wish there were more choices, more complications, more interesting rules and more interesting subsystems. But then, to be fair, when I start playing those complex games, I start going, why is there a rule for everything? And then when I start playing OSR games, I start going, why is this game so boring? So really the answer is
the grass is always greener in whatever game Derek's not playing.
My favorite game system is whichever one I'm not playing.
I think that's just very you, Derek, because you have a personality where you are very analytical, but you also find the flaws in whatever you're looking at.
True.
And therefore, whatever you're not looking at, you'd be like, these flaws are sticking in my craw because I'm dealing with them right now.
Right.
I wish I could go to this other thing because it doesn't have those flaws, and then it's just an endless cycle.
It isn't. And then I am just continually discontent. It is a continual cycle of discontent, which is why I move from rules heavy to rules light, from tactical to narrative. It's just it's an endless cycle of disappointment. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, is bigger always better? The answer is clearly no.
Obviously not. I mean, look, the question is bigger always better in the title, and the whole thing at the beginning, D&D versus Shadowdark, who wins, is just obviously a more bombastic way of framing this very deep and interesting design question that we're actually been talking about this whole time.
Yeah, and I mean, from a sales perspective, D&D wins. I mean,
of course, I mean, that's the other thing is how are you going to define a victory? Obviously,
right. But
obviously, you can set the terms of victory in a way such that anything wins if you wanted it to win, right?
Right.
Which one has more content by Kelsey? They both have some content by Kelsey, but Shadowdark has more.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I said too. That's what's interesting about Shadowdark, and I think one of the reasons it's been popular is because while it is considered, an OSR or a new SR game, in reality, it ends up kind of playing out a lot like a simplified version of D&D 5e. I mean, if you got rid of feats and instead just kind of had ability score increases, a lot of the times when you level up in this game in Shadowdark, you always roll randomly, but a lot of times you end up getting an ability score increase,
right?
On a lot of your rolls, or you get basically a +1 bonus to hit, which you could argue is basically your proficiency going up. And so most of the time when you level up in this game, you basically get an ASI or you get a bonus to hit, which if you were to remove feats, which I believe used to be at least in 2014, an optional rule.
Yeah, they were a hypothetically optional rule that everybody used, and that players would revolt and say this is a bad GM. If the GM's like, guys, I think maybe let's keep it simple and not use feats this time because it's an optional rule.
Right. Which makes a certain amount of sense. But I mean, but at the same time, I did run a 5e campaign very early on, and I said, and I remember when it was 1D&D, and I was involved with playtesting. This was like back when Monty Cook was still involved. So this is like 2013, 2012.
Did you playtest in the early period of time when the odd ability scores mattered because they gave you automatic results, whereas the even one gave you modifiers? That was actually cool.
It was cool. And they were trying to create this very modular game.
Yeah, I remember that. I would have loved to see that modular game that they were trying to create.
Me too, yeah. And so in that respect, Shadowdark feels like that modular game, the base core, right? With like no modules, no tactical complex module attached, no feat module, no whatever module attached. And so it is basically a super stripped down version of 5th edition because the only distinction is that you basically only get ASIs and proficiency increases randomly as you level up, and whatever kind of special abilities that your class gets, you basically get at level 1. And you don't really gain any additional class features or choices or subclasses. And before people say that, well, that's crazy, that's nonsense, don't forget, like, 3rd edition Barbarian, you made no choices about your character other than the 6 feats or whatever that you got throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, and that was just in the general chassis of everyone. That wasn't part of your barbarian class.
Right. There were no like subclasses. You were just every barbarian got rage, fast movement. Eventually you got danger sense and damage reduction. And that was it.
That's not it. That's not all that every barbarian got, Derek. Many barbarians also got a bunch of extra skill points and a sneak attack die. They also got 2 bonus feats. And that's because they took 2 levels in Fighter and some number of levels, at least 1 level in Rogue. Now, Rogue made them lose base attack bonus, whereas Fighter didn't. But
yes, multiclassing did exist. Multiclassing did exist. Yes.
Many of those barbarians, in fact, only had 1 level in Barbarian because
right. Because just like a lot of just like there were a lot of level 1 Rangers out there.
But that being aside, I think that you still make a very good point that it's definitely possible. And look, people complained about the 3.0 Barbarian, to be clear.
Yeah.
It's not like you're saying they did it and everyone loved it back then, so everyone should love it back now.
Right.
Exactly. But not everyone complained, just some people did. And the people who don't care and who like that simplicity, or who especially like that it's random, the advancement in Shadowdark, so you can't do a build ahead of time. Like, I think that they really appreciate that aspect of the character building.
And let me make sure I cast aspersions on the other side of the group. There are many people. Again, I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum, but there are many people who, especially even in the Pathfinder 2 community, but in any of these complex games with a lot of complicated choices, I argue, we call it that we say they don't play Pathfinder. We say that they play Path Builder. That they are playing.
That's their fun. They like playing Path Builder. They have 75 characters that they've built, and that 2 of those characters they almost played in a game one time, but it fell apart before the first
one
session.
time. Yes,
right. And you know what? Yeah. But think about how much joy they got from building those characters.
Well, it's a mentality difference, right? Which is, are you playing the game? So you've got your character and you've got the story, you've got the adventure, you've got the world, right? Are you excited to level up because it means that your character will now get to, are you playing the adventure so that you can level up, or are you leveling up so that you can play the adventure, right? I think there's a mixture of both, right? I think some people view the adventure as the necessary price that they have to pay so that they can level up and get the next nugget.
You're right, and it's empirically correct, because in Living Forgotten Realms, there were just with the Living World, there were a lot of rules that allowed people to just quickly replay through adventures that had good items or whatever they wanted from it.
Run them back.
And they would. And there's stories of people, new players, who just like quit after the first game because everyone else who was at their table had already done it like 50 times because it was an adventure that had good items, and they were speed going through everything. They were, like the mayor's like, adventurers, can you? Yeah, okay, we go into the crypt. Okay, guys, when we're going in here, we're gonna turn right first. There's a trap on the door on the left, and but there's a lever here on the right that'll open the way in the middle, and we can speed run to the item here. We can skip most of the encounters. There's gonna be zombies in this other room, so just bring your slashing weapons or whatever. Like there were situations like that where they basically did a speed run and just wanted to farm the adventures. So now that's not everybody who played in that, to be clear, but there were some people who did so, and they also sometimes caused other people to leave.
Right. What you just described is why when I would play like MMOs like World of Warcraft, why I would reach max level and essentially be done with the game. Because they were like, okay, now you need to go run this dungeon or this raid 50 times so that you can get all the cool items or until you get a full set of gear or whatever. And I'm like, I want to run it once. Like in my mind, like it was cool. We built up this thing. I got to go destroy the Elemental Lord, and we did it. Yay! That story is done for me. I don't need to keep going. But what about the gear? And what about the sick items? And I'm like, that's not why I was leveling up. I heard a lot of people used to say like, "Oh, World of Warcraft starts or MMOs start when you reach max level," and I always hated like that idea. I
get it, Derek.
I'd rather restart a character and play in a different set of zones and get to experience all those fun little quests and storylines.
No, I understand. In fact, like, I know a lot of people who get addicted and just keep playing the end game content, but the time that I played WoW, it was my term project. I was in a interactive and nonlinear narrative class at MIT, and they were examples of term projects that we could do, and one of them was basically to play in an MMO and experience the different narratives, different game systems, and talk about it and compare and contrast with other MMOs. So World of Warcraft was out at the time. It was pretty popular. I got World of Warcraft. I got my main up to the maximum level, which I believe was 60 at the time. I got all my alts in each of the other classes up to like 15 or some amount that was very easy to do because it was an early amount so that I could write about the classes. I engaged with... I found a pick-up group that could do some of the endgame raids at least once. Maybe not great, but at least I could get into it because I was obviously not part of a hardcore guild. You couldn't be if you were just doing it for a term project. And then I quit and canceled my subscription when my project was over. And I wrote about the economics of the auction house and other things. I wrote about the social dynamics of the different groups, and I completed my project. And then that was it. It was an enjoyable experience, but I think a lot of people don't play them like you and I do, though.
No.
Right? They want to go over the content again and again. It's the gotcha box mentality and getting the reward, the dopamine.
Yeah, like that, like the loot crate or getting the item, but getting the high item with the, what is it called, the high roll or
the
like
chase
high
item.
Well, like like there'll be an item, but then there's like random stats, and so then it's like, well, not like
you have to get the one with the perfect.
But
stats.
you have to get the one with the perfect stats, so it's like you need to get it 18 times or whatever before you hopefully get it. I can't remember the term that they use for that, like to describe.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't know what the term is.
It's like I think Diablo is really known for doing that, but the point is that's not, for me, that's not why I play these games. I don't really care. People are very shocked in general with my approach to role-playing games as a player, in that I don't really care about my character. I don't care about my character from like a build perspective. I don't really care about my character like from a story perspective. My character is simply a vehicle that I can use so that I, Derek, can be a participant in the ongoing stories. And so for me, it's all about the campaign, the accomplishments, the story. I don't really care about my character. My character is very replaceable to me. And I know that's very different from the way that a lot of people interact with
from a lot of people, Derek.
Yeah, very different.
So it means
on both
that
sides.
Your characters would necessarily be very utilitarian about themselves.
I have no problem being, a support character, the character who just buffs everybody, or fills in a role as needed. Yeah, for sure.
Where you would just be like, I need to complete the story. I need to do the next thing. What does that mean for me? You know, it doesn't matter, right? Because you don't care about the character.
Yeah, like when I played World of Warcraft, I deliberately made a priest because I was told, correctly so, that it was the easiest way to get into groups. And then even when they introduced like the dungeon finder, which would like, you know, automatically pair you up with people and then take you to the dungeons, you know, there was 1 slot for a healer, 1 slot for a tank, and then 3 slots for damage dealers. So you had to compete against other people for damage dealers, but there was always a need, you know, there was always the limiting reagent was the healer 99% of the time. And so, you know, I was just that, not because I really cared about the story of the build experience. I didn't really particularly care. I just liked the story, seeing the world, going around, exploring, you know, seeing stuff like that. And that made it the most easy for me to do. So that's what I did. But,
yeah, I think there's just different types of players who are approaching and looking for and asking for different things out of their games. And there's so many of them that people always try to split it into 3 or 4 or 5 types. And really, there's just thousands of types that just have some similarities. Maybe even as many as there are players in RPGs. And you can't really just classify people into baskets. And that's why we need to have so many different kinds of games and why it's wonderful that we do. Because if what you want out of a game is different than what I want out of a game. But we're both more similar to each other than a lot of other people who are out there.
Sure. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. Because if you want that sort of a, you know, path builder experience, you know, you're not going to get that with Shadowdark. You know, rolling up Shadowdark characters and seeing what they look like at level 10, which is the max level, is going to be a very different than, you know, path builder and being like, yeah, I built at least 5 of each class, you know, with each subclass and all these different options. And I built them to 20, and I built an investigator that did this, and I built a oracle that did that. And I wanted to see what would happen if I built a druid that only focused on this. And you're like, yeah, you have all these, like, you know, it's almost like a fun way to play the game without playing it for those people. You're not going to get that with Shadowdark, you know, and if part of the reason, like I said, do you level up so that you can play the, you know, the adventure, or do you play the adventure so that you can level up? Leveling up in Shadowdark is a very underwhelming experience. So, if you're playing a game like Shadowdark or an OSR game like Shadowdark is positively bumping compared to leveling up in old, you know, true BX D&D. What did you get? Like almost literally nothing, you know, like your attack bonus maybe went up by 1.
Well, some people get overwhelmed by leveling up in other games. So maybe they would just be normally whelmed by the Shadowdark leveling up instead of underwhelmed like you were.
It is not the most uncommon thing, Mark, to hear people say, yeah, I kind of stopped taking skill feats in Pathfinder 2 once I reached the teens because I kind of took the ones that I wanted and I didn't really care about the rest, and I just don't need that extra complexity on my character sheet.
I mean, there's a reason that removing skill feats was one of the optional rules in the Game Mastery Guide, in case people just didn't want them.
Right. They're like, there's already so much going on in my character sheet. This is just another extra level that I don't necessarily need. And yet there are also people who go, I refuse to play PF2 without the free archetype rule because 11
and in
class
fact, I would like to be dual classed and have free archetype.
11 class feats is not enough. I need 21.
Yeah, or 32 with dual class plus free
or
archetype.
32, yeah. So it's just that's
and
crazy.
We'll play it in Strength of Thousands, where you also get extra class feats from the Academia system, so we can get over 40.
But Jedi Protector, yes, I was on one of the servers where I think it was like the server where the Corrupted Blood plague took place with Hakar, and I remember that it was crazy, and like I literally remember people abandoning the cities, and I remember it was a real thing. It was kind of really actually kind of cool. And I've heard that you know, epidemiologists and stuff have studied that as sort of a study in how people behave in those sort of plague, you know, or pandemic type situations. It was really cool.
That is pretty interesting.
Do you know about this bug, Mark?
I heard that there was a bug
Long story
where
there was
like a bunch of
there was a damage over time thing that got applied to you on a raid,
right?
And it would spread to nearby players, and after like 30 or 40 seconds, right, the buff would, you know, or like a minute, it would kill you, and then it would end, obviously. So as long as everybody who had it died, it was an issue. Now, it was supposed to drop off of you before you left the zone. But what some people figured out is that they could leave the zone with it on them, and then it spread to people. And in theory, if those people just stood where they are and died, it would have ended and would never spread anywhere. But they, of course, walked around with it trying to get help, and then that spread to more people and spread to more people and spread to more people, and it was actually really, really crazy. It was kind of cool in its own way. Also, my random other flex, my server, Laughing Skull, was also the server of Leroy Jenkins. And Pals for Life was a guild on my server. So shout out.
So it had both Leroy Jenkins and the Plague.
Yeah, I think the Corrupted Blood event happened on multiple servers because the bug was, ubiquitous across the game. But
okay.
Anyways.
Well, that makes sense.
Yes. But it was an interesting little experience. But there you go, Mark. Horrible from like a character optimization standpoint, right? Like, I can't play the game. I'm not able to access my guild leader because he's dead. I'm not able to sell my material, my stuff in the bazaar or whatever or the trade house the auction house because everyone's dead, and I can't go back to my capital city, and I can't get a group because no one trusts anybody and everyone thinks they're going to kill you. So it was like you basically, quote unquote, couldn't play the game. But I thought it was awesome, Like, I was like, look at this cool, fun experience that's happening that is clearly outside of the boundaries of the rules of the game, but it is delightful. So I was appreciative of it. But I'm a weirdo. Like I said, I don't really care about my character.
That a lot of people, when you have an event that's as unusual as that, at least in retrospect, will be like, that was interesting. That was different than what I saw. Yeah. Even they don't have to be so far as to be a Derek, I think, to eventually, in retrospect, be like, I was cool that I was part of that. Even if at the time they might have been like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to do my thing. Why is everyone dead?
Right. Well, I'm a big fan of I guess what I think, an outdoor, I don't know if they use this term in game like TTRPG, but tier 2 fun, right? Where it's not really fun when you're doing it, but it's really fun when you're looking back at it. And obviously, Derek, me personally, is a big fan of that. Like I hike the Appalachian Trail, and I like doing these kind of like long distance grueling things. And it's like not fun when you're doing it. It sucks, and you're uncomfortable, and you're in a lot of whatever. But when you're done with it, and you look back at it, you go, wow, that was awesome. That was quite what an adventure, what an accomplishment. Ironically, I kind of, avoid in some ways type 1 fun, which is like watching a movie, or playing like a video game where it's like, this is designed to be fun right now in the immediate presence, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of lasting value beyond that.
Yeah. What about vicarious type 2 fun? I had a friend who was very into that. I mean, I didn't hear of them as type 1 and type 2 at the time, but he would, for example, have all these stories from EVE Online, which he did not play. He would never play. He'd be like, oh yeah, I'd never play it. It would be terrible. But he would be like, these stories are hilarious. About this time, this guy was asleep, and then they destroyed his flagship, which basically was worth like 5,000 real world dollars and took like 8 months for them to have set up, but they came in and destroyed it. And he would tell these like long stories because he would read about them vicariously, the things that happened. And he'd be like, I'm so glad people are playing and creating these stories so I can read them, and I would never want to play because it sounds miserable.
That's an interesting, I don't know. That's a very strange. I mean, there's obviously a percentage of that, right? There are people who watch other people play games.
Sure. It's like, there's people who like to watch Let's Plays or actual plays or other things like that. But then in this case, specifically, he was focused on things that I think almost unilaterally would not have been fun at the time for people, but probably did become a great story, at least to some people afterward. Maybe not the guy who was asleep and people in the real life were trying to contact him. Get on. The flagship is being destroyed.
Yeah, I'm glad I never got into the EVE game. In fact, my friends who used to play used to say the only way, it's like they say like a War Games quote, which is like a strange game. The only winning move is not to play.
Not to play. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, they used to say that all the time. And I was like, what is this game? And basically they described it as like tier 2 fun because they were just like, oh, I hate every minute of it. And I'm like, oh, why don't you quit? They're like, because I love it.
There you go. Well, you know what, Derek? You and I won because we didn't.
Yeah,
play.
that's true. We didn't. We were the most tier fun that you could have.
Well, maybe my friend won because he not only didn't play, but he also got to find all of the fun things that were happening to people and learn about them or whatever.
So we got about 10 minutes left. I don't know if chat has any comments or questions. I mean, they've mostly been pretty calm, I think, because we haven't been rage baiting.
Hold on, but we
strangely enough,
we may have missed out on some things. So we talked about money being a way that D&D could be said to have won over Shadowdark.
Right.
Here's a weird we don't have Steven, but here's a weird and anecdotal way that I could claim that Shadowdark has won one over on D&D.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of friends who work at like a bunch of these different game companies.
Yeah.
Like if someone who was like not in the game industry, who was my friend or relative or relative's friend, wanted something signed by someone from Wizards of the Coast, I could get that done. Or from Paizo or from anywhere else. But the one time that I did get a request for that was this past Gen Con for a signature from Kelsey on Shadowdark. So in my anecdotal experience, therefore 1 is greater than 0, and therefore there was more demand on that signature than there was on my leveraging other contacts for signatures. There you go.
Well, there you go.
What else do we need without Steven? Oh, and that the way that's connected to 80s movies and
80s movies
and Hollywood costume design by
by Steven's brother. No, I mean, I guess I don't know if you have access to the chat to do a poll, Mark, but I guess my question is if you let's pick something that's moderate, not like 5 months and not like 5 years and not like a one shot.
How do you do a poll? Because I do.
It's in the chat. If assuming you're a moderator,
I'm a moderator.
Down at the bottom where you would type, there's a little plus button.
I do not see that. Let me pretend that I'm Steven. Okay, I'm now Steven. There's a plus button down there. Oh, I see it. What do you want me to do? Start a poll?
So create a poll. Yeah, start a poll. So basically, if you were being told that you needed to play, not run, but play in a campaign, and it was going to run, let's say, for a year, approximately, let's just say, 40 sessions plus or minus 10. Would you, audience, chat, prefer to play D&D, and by that I suppose I mean D&D 5th edition, or Shadowdark? Now, obviously, this is a biased poll because of, people have anti-WoTC sentiments, and our channel sort of skews less pro-WoTC these days, or this channel, not my channel. My channel too, but even though I say all the time D&D. But I mean, the fact of the matter is there's pros and cons to both games.
All right, we're doing it, and I'm gonna let them choose 2014 or 2024 on the D&D side.
So Mark giving you guys a lot of options here.
But no, I'm not giving 3. I'm combining 2014 and 2024 into one choice.
So either or.
That way, because there are I know in the community some people who really like one or the other more.
Right.
Even though I think they're both good, and I like a lot of the changes in 2024 better, but it's also
me too.
Kind of incremental, and therefore like I can see why people might not think it's worth learning it just for those as well. So
come on, Jaina, you can't. That
I didn't give you a neither.
Yeah, that's a cheating. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying
if you had to play one of the two.
If you had to play,
because you were being told you needed to play one of these two, and your group would not listen to whatever artisanal RPG you wanted to play that was better for you. They were like, we're only considering Shadowdark or D&D. That's it.
Right. Clearly, right now, I would choose Daggerheart, but I'm saying if you didn't have a choice, you're that was it.
So it
Trey
looks
says
like
Trey's like, I'm a forever GM. I'd be happy to play anything. This is surprising how neck and neck this is. Wow,
yeah, it looks like it's pretty close.
Very close
right now.
Yeah, the government is now requiring you to play TTRPGs. Right, it's a new thing.
That's
you can
right.
You can get universal basic income, but only if you play one of these two games. So it'll be interesting to check out. I will say though that, as you can see on the screen, if Shadowdark does have one problem that D&D 5e does not have, it's the lack of monsters. And there's a decent bestiary here with a lot of the greatest hits, from D&D history, sort of, repackaged with the serial numbers filed off. It's totally serviceable, but it is a paltry sum compared to the vast amount of monsters that you have for, say, 5th edition D&D. And so Shadowdark RPG, designed for use with Shadowzoo.com, Roll for Combat is doing their remake of their core bestiary books, and doing them in Shadowdark form, which is an interesting design premise. But it'll be interesting to see because, again, some of the Roll for Combat monsters are real strange. But Michael Putlack, the sort of the right-hand man of Kelsey over at Arcane Library, is in charge of the conversions. So.
And Kelsey said on the stream the other day that now she thinks Michael might have done more Shadowdark
monsters than her. Yes.
Barely.
Right, exactly. So very interesting. But I'm not even trying to be flippant about this. I just think that a game like this is benefited from having a solid bestiary.
Holy moly! 26 versus 26 of the 52 people voted for D&D versus Shadowdark. It's exactly tied right now.
Right. Well, Glenn, Deathbringer's not out yet, and it won't be out until next year, so we can't get to there yet. But in theory, yes. I mean, because that's the other thing too, right? If you're planning on playing Deathbringer is going to be a Shadowdark sort of variant, and so the Shadowdark monsters that you would get with the Roll for Combat Kickstarter are also going to therefore be immediately applicable to the Deathbringer game.
Very much by design.
Yeah, very much by design. Right. That's why
it's all according to Steven's plan.
Right. But this is a really interesting split, I got to admit. Now, I will say, I know people are going to hate to hear this, but this game is more like D&D 5e than you might, ultimately think. But
yeah, like when Derek and I were doing a little bit of pre-chat before the show, I pointed that out too, where it's like with Steven setting these goalposts where it's like the vast one direction of possibilities is D&D or Pathfinder, and the vast other direction is Shadowdark, and it's like, well, they're actually kind of closer to each other than I mean, they're not that close, but they're closer to each other than a lot of other RPGs. Deathbringer has appeared. There's a super chat that says, "Speak of Deathbringer," and he appears. Wear the watch, Derek.
That's hilarious. You know what? Maybe I'll wear it to like PAX Unplugged or something like that.
Steven then said, "Did I miss it? I just got into the hotel."
I just did an incredibly sick plug for both your game and for both your Kickstarter and for Deathbringer.
It was just like a minute or two ago, which obviously Professor saw.
Yeah, and honestly, too, by the way, unbiasedly, I like Shadowdark. I think it's a great game. I kind of one of the reasons I'm kind of interested in Deathbringer is because I like the idea of adding some additional, I'll call them complications, right, to the game, and some additional variants that might not necessarily make it a more clunky game, but that change up the experience a little bit and give it a little bit of a different edge, vis-a-vis make it feel very different than 5e. Right, and that's what I was kind of trying to get at, is that I think one of the reasons this game has been so successful is because it's very comfortable for people to make the switch from D&D 5e to this game. I kind of saw that with the Cosmere RPG as well. They clearly made some design choices, and actually I spoke with Andrew Fisher at Gen Con, and that was part of their deliberate decision, which is let's make this a game that people are very comfortable making a switch from 5e to our game. If you think about Daggerheart, you're asking people to put away their Dispel Die D20 that they spent $50 on, and now pick up D12s and roll with hope and roll with fear, and you're like, what the fuck is going even on? It's going to be a lot of fun. Dungeon. Now, Professor, which PAX? Because there's two PAXs. There's PAX Unplugged, and then there's PAX West. So you got to be more specific. There's a lot of PAXs.
There's too many PAXs.
Maybe
there's not enough PAXs.
I think there's probably enough. Do you remember when there was? Well, that was a long time.
Remember
Like
there were a bunch of other ones.
Okay,
right?
I figured it was unplugged because right before this call, Steven was telling us about
Steven was like, "Oh my gosh, all the hotels are full.
All the hotels are full in Philly." So, yeah, fantastic.
All right.
But all right, well, there you go.
I bet it's time for you to play racquetball, isn't it?
Actually, not tonight.
Oh. Well, then we could go
racquetball.
for another 3 hours. No, I'm just
No,
kidding.
I have a bro date. My friend. So I used to have season tickets to the Playhouse Square Broadway series, but I don't have them anymore after my extended period of unemployment years ago when I was hiking, and I never got my tickets again. My friend has great seats. His wife can't make it tonight because of something with the kids, so we are going to see the Beetlejuice musical. And I'm excited because it's been a long time since I've been to a musical. So I'm going to go downtown to put on a blazer and
that's
button
perfect.
up. And,
you shelled Strange and Unusual, and now you're gonna go see something that is strange and unusual.
I also am strange and unusual.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a musical number called Strange and Unusual.
There might be, right? I don't know. I don't know anything about the Beetlejuice musical, but given that that's a famous quote from Beetlejuice.
Yes, of course it is. No, it doesn't look. I'm looking at the soundtrack, but
too bad.
But there is
was a
one
missed
called,
opportunity.
They do apparently do the Banana Boat song Deo, so apparently there's going to be that. But the Roll for Combat says that is where I got the tagline from.
Well, I
So
kind of knew
fantastic.
that because if it was from a movie, then Steven got it from there.
Yeah, exactly. And see, look at that. We got screwed because Professor got one of the last 2 hotel reservations.
Oh, so that's why there weren't any, and Steven had to go off the block. That makes sense.
We're off the block. It's not too bad. I will accept it as being decent.
It's fine. It's 1.2 miles. We can walk 1.2 miles.
So there you go. Fantastic.
All right.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. And of course, remember, if you want to battle the zoo, you need to roll for combat.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.